feeling good, can I tell?
Y'all will be shared with some different material. A little something.
Okay, hold that family. My name is Brother Ray. We'd like to welcome everyone to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. Ladies and gentlemen, the Zoom audience, can everybody mute yourself? Can everybody mute yourself in the Zoom? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Brooklyn William Mackey Jr. History Club. My name is Brother Ray. We meet here every other Wednesday in honor of William Mackey Jr., Amos Wilson, Elhaj Malik Shabazz, Louis Ray Rivera, Brother Assad, Dr. Ben, Dr. Park, Gil Noble, Ivan Van Sertima, Mr. Viola Maddox, and all the historians who gave up fame and fortune. Amos Wilson, Professor Mackey, they didn't have to do what they did. They gave up fame and fortune to burn the midnight oil and bring history and communication to the black community, global black world community. So we never want to let these individuals be forgotten. So we meet and honor so they can continue their work and never let the people forget them. Brother Mike is going to bring the camera over to the Amos collection in honor of Amos Wilson and Sababu and African World Info Systems. We have the Amos collection, Blueprint for Black Power, the developmental psychology of the black child, falsification of African consciousness, black-on-black violence, issues of manhood in black and white, and African-centered consciousness, and the development, and Amos's last, psychodynamics of self-hatred. We have Distorted Truth by S.K. Damiana, Bastardization of African Cosmology, Amos' classic Awakening Natural Genius of Black Children, African-Centered Consciousness versus the New World Order, Revealing the Unspeakable Bible Verses by Earl Ponder, and we have Sister Empress Jamaica, Confronting the Color Crisis in the African Diaspora. So we have those books in honor of them. Also, Louis Ray Rivera, in honor of him, we used to come down here when Professor Mackey left us and speak for hours. Tim Wise, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son, in honor of Brother Harold, the Transfer Agreement. Untold story of the secret pact between the Third Reich and Jewish Palestine. I found this, The Lost Jews, Last of the Ethiopian Falashas. Sister Carol Alexander, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide, White Rage. Charles Hamilton Houston and the Struggle for Civil Rights. Everybody is claiming, is it straight? Is the camera straight?
Yeah, I got it.
Everybody's claiming civil rights, but they're not paying any dues.
Groundwork.
Dr. Randy Short, Slavery, Mastery, and the Impact of Religious Revealed. That's in honor of Dr. Randy Short. He has a PhD from Harvard, and the man is struggling. The Invention of the White Race by Theodore Allen. The Irritated Genie, Jays Are the Problem. World War II, COVID, and media censorship. His new book is unbelievable, and you can purchase this book on War on the Horizon. The brother is phenomenal. We have this book in honor of the Irritated Genie, Daniel Kamani. In my personal opinion, the only one that cared about the people of Georgia is Cynthia McKinney. Wow. When China sneezes, from the coronavirus lockdown to the global political economic crisis, our sister Cynthia McKinney. The real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates' Big Pharma and the Global War on Democracy by Robert Kennedy, and COVID-19, The Great Reset by Dr. Joseph McCullough and Ronald Cummings. And I just picked this one up, Edward Downes, forwarded by Robert Kennedy, Causes Unknown. The Epidemic of Sudden Death in 2021 and 2022. Shows you all the people that died from all these heart attacks. Edward Downes did an excellent book on that. And in honor of Dr. Ben. Wasn't too many computers around in this time. Black man of the Nile and his family. This is from Dr. Ben. So we have these books for people to purchase via the internet, or if you come down here and you read them and you get some understanding on what's going on. So I'm going to say a couple of community events. On Thursday, on YouTube and Facebook, Thorough Black Talk with Tad, Keisha, Ashe, Brother Black, and our sister Marcia. The gang from Thorough Black Talk, they come on at 8 o'clock. That's on Facebook and YouTube.
That's right.
Put your information in the chat, and Sister Keisha will copy it down and send you the information where you can catch her program. The program is phenomenal. Also, our Philadelphia family, Sister Empress Chi and the Million Women's March, Blog Talk Radio out of Philly. Every Saturday at 10:30, the telephone number is 1-319-527-6189. You dial that number at 10:30, Sister Empress Chi, Blog Talk Radio, come on and you can get in on the conversation. That's our Philadelphia family. Excellent program. Our brother Ayo Kamati has a program, comes on Sankofa Radio every Monday at 10 a.m. in the morning. Sankofa Revolutionary Radio. This is WSYP 95.1 FM. It's out of Birmingham, Alabama, and that's with Brother Anthony Mohammed. Every program on that radio station is unbelievable. So you go into that and you can get more information. Our Baltimore family, Brother Darren Muhammad, in the State of the City, comes on every Saturday, Thursday, and sometimes Wednesday, out of Baltimore. And that's on TuneIn Radio and Facebook Live, also on Instagram under the title Mohammed the Comet. That's Brother Darren Muhammad. Also, every Tuesday at 7 o'clock, Dr. Aline, program on Your Immunity Project. That's at 7 o'clock, California Radio on Thursdays. That's an excellent program. Also, Brother James McIntosh and the Simotap community family. They have Dr. James has a radio program on WBAI. Comes on every Wednesday. The title of this program is called Minefield. And that comes on from 1:30 to 2:30, Mike?
2 to 2:30.
2 to 2:30. Dr. James McIntosh and the Simotap family. He has an excellent program. And if you go into Simotap, he will let you know on all the events that Simotap has coming on. So that's an excellent program. Also, Community Cop comes on every Tuesday at 5 o'clock on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. That's with Brother Mike Graves, the old leader Julian Harper, and the Community Cop family. That comes on Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and you can also view all the Community Cop programs that they've been doing for years on YouTube under Community Cop. You also can view all the lectures under the B.K. William Mackey Jr. History Club on YouTube under B.K. William Mackey Jr. So we have this information. Also, tomorrow, every Friday, Brother Trust and African Echo Study Group out of Newark, New Jersey That comes on at 8 o'clock. Brother True, Brother Trust, Danny, and the gang out of Newark, New Jersey. If you put your email in the chat, somebody will get it down. Brother True will get it down, and Brother Danny will let you know, and he will send you the email. And they're doing the latest book by Sababu and Amos, The Psychology of Self-Hatred and Self-Defeat Toward a Reclamation of the African Mind. Also, on Saturdays, I believe at 1:30, Brother Trust is also the moderator of this program. The Know Thyself Study Group with Brother True and the gang out of Asbury Park, that's the Saturday, that's another excellent program, and they're doing Chancellor Williams, The Destruction of Black Civilization. And one thing about these two study groups that's phenomenal, when you think you know something, you have to smack yourself. Because you might not know. Because Trust will have you thinking another atmosphere, you're a bad man. So we have these programs on. So ladies and gentlemen, give yourself a big hand to people that came out in the live. And also give yourself a big hand for the people in our Zoom family. Because one of the things Miss Leola Maddox believed in, she had an old car. And she drove it all the way from Teaneck, New Jersey, past Teaneck, New Jersey, Teaneck all the way to the United African Movement, because she believed in bringing people together and having lectures. So I also believe in that. And no matter what, bringing us together is one thing. So for our Black History Month, we always give the whole month to our brother Trust. He had an excellent program last time he was here. He's going to be our keynote speaker tonight. And his title is going to be Socialism, Communism of the African American during the Harlem Renaissance. Ladies and gentlemen, give Brother Trust a great big hand for coming out. And we turn it over to Brother Trust. All right. Thanks, Mike.
First, I have to do the preliminaries. Before I present my presentation, I would like, in African traditional context, I would like the permission of the oldest person in the room for the opportunity to speak. And just to give you an idea of what that means, it's respect, reverence, and honor to those individuals that came before you. And no matter how old you are, there's always somebody there that's older than you. So I'm asking the oldest person in the room for the opportunity to speak.
Yes, we don't want nobody telling their age.
Well, if all of y'all say at the same time, it's same good. It's the same thing.
76.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Before we commence the program, I have to make some salutations to let everybody know that first.
African tradition. That's the oldest person. May I speak?
Okay, let's give applause to Ray Ray, the William Mackey History Club, for their commitment, to putting these forums on a bi-monthly basis and providing a service to the community. A lot of times, no matter how much we see things, we don't know how much work goes into, putting these particular events on, even if it's just watching it from Zoom. It is all time consuming. And in order to do the things that Brother Ray Ray and Brother Mike and Sister Keisha and Brother Tad and all of these individuals that work tirelessly for the Black community and don't get a lot of acknowledgement, And it ain't like we don't know. We know what our job is, and we know what needs to be done. But sometimes it comes down to us being able to be recognized, not so much by popularity, but by the community, the people who we, spend so much time, helping. So I always want to come here and make sure that I acknowledge the commitment, the tireless, drive and support of this organization, and what they provide as an alternative outlet to the community for education and development. So I wanted to say that first. Next, I also want to, acknowledge that we're in the last stretch of African History Month, Black History Month, and as you do know, in the past week we had quite a few birthdays. Me and Mike was talking about W.E.B. Du Bois' birthday was this week, which is today. Nina Simone yesterday. Frederick Douglass's was on the 14th. My daughter was on the 20th. And, for me, this month is always special only because at the same time, Black people, those are one who do have a sense of consciousness, get together and reflect on who we are as a group. And to me, that's a good thing, because a lot of times, throughout the year, I feel like a lone soldier, and when I see Black people like yourselves, it's easy to gravitate towards you because we are like-minded, But when you're out, amongst our people and what I call the conscious deserts that we find ourselves in, sometimes, it could be very lonely, it could be very lonely. Because even though we do consume information like this, material that the average person might not, be aware of, the problem is not sharing it. The problem is being able to know that the person you're going to share it with is going to receive it. Anybody can talk to a wall, It's the response that counts,
That's right.
So in this case, that's what we wanted to talk about. Now, but I want to dedicate this lecture to two individuals, two very important individuals. This is also in regard to a person whose today is their birthday, and also to a person who was a very, very, very good friend of mine, who helped me, immensely in research and study, and who helped me, guide me in the area that I'm getting ready to share with you. He was one of the individuals who was a very, very strong consultant in that particular area. And I want to dedicate this lecture to two individuals. I want to dedicate this to, for all of my 5% family out there, to Clarence Smith, or what we call affectionately the father, which is his birthday today, the 22nd. He was the founder of the 5% Nation, and he also, as you know, represented, the spearhead for this, what I would call quest for knowledge itself. And I salute all of those individuals, my family out there in the viewing area. And I want to dedicate this lecture to Clarence Smith, Allah, the father, the founder of our way of life and nation. And the other individual I would like to dedicate this lecture to is Jeff Perry. Jeff Perry, very good friend of mine. He, I would call the preeminence, he was the expert of a very prominent personality in the African community that I will speak about this evening. I met him maybe about 30 years ago. In the process of doing research on that particular personality. And when I first met him, I never met him in person. I met him doing research at the Schomburg Library in a reference book, an index book. That's how I first met him. And when he wrote this article on Hewitt Harrison, it blew me away because how I got introduced to Hewitt Harrison, and then that got me into the issue of socialism and communism and that, and then the Harlem Renaissance and all that, was I went to a lecture one time Dr. Clark was giving, and Dr. Clark, his mentor that he used to rave about was John G. Jackson. That was his man, you know, because John G. Jackson was a few years older than himself, and he was Dr. Clark's go-between with all of the scholars that came during the Renaissance, like Hewitt Harrison and Cyril Briggs and Arturo Schomburg and all of these guys. And but at the time, Dr. Clark was a young guy. I mean, very young, younger teenager young. And the guys that were in Harlem at that time, people like John G. Jackson, and those were the new individuals coming from the South, coming to the North. Now remember, the whole issue about the Harlem Renaissance is built on the Great Migration. That's what it's built on.
No doubt.
And you have to realize the significance of the role that played in the transformation of us as a people. And when I mean transformation, I'm not just talking about us and a new location and freedom and opportunity. No, I'm not talking about just that. What I'm talking about is us transforming ourselves, from a cultural standpoint of view, being exposed to concepts, ideas, nuances that we never had, had connection with. So when we think of the Harlem Renaissance, we're thinking about most of the things that are new. And black people coming from the South are now trying to shed themselves of that cultural framework, the residue that they had down there. So, and remember, that was the underpinning of slavery, post-slavery, or what we would call Jim Crow, or the what's the name movement? The after the Civil War, I can't think now.
Freeman.
No.
Reconstruction.
Reconstruction period. When you have Reconstruction, you have this period where they're putting in place all of these particular guidelines and all of these particular provisions in order to limit the development of African people, after the very issue of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And what that opens up is that our cultural base at that time was primarily Christian,
Absolutely.
primarily Indo-European. That means that most of us, and I'm talking about the influences here, I'm not talking about what we brought here with us as Africans that were kidnapped and then enslaved. And I want to reiterate this. Europeans never went to Africa and got slaves. It never happened. Let me say that again. Europeans never went to Africa and got slaves. What they did was they went to Africa and got free people, and then they enslaved them. That's very different, because we would have the impression that slaves already exist. Now, was there slavery in Africa? Not in the context that we would have here, but slavery did exist, not just in Africa, but anywhere in the world. The issue is where and what kind, what level of, servitude that we are talking about. And the second thing is, how long did it take? So I'm pretty sure, I was talking to Mike a little earlier about some of these things. And if I asked you about the slave trade, if I said to you, well, how bad was the Atlantic slave trade? What would you say?
Terrible.
Say that again?
Terrible.
Terrible?
Barbaric.
Barbaric?
Horrendous.
Horrendous. Okay.
Inhumane.
Inhumane? Okay. Anything else? Okay, now I'm going to ask you the next question. What other slavery do you know about to compare it to?
Prison.
No. What I'm saying is that the reason you have that impression is because most of us, we don't even have a clue about any other form of slavery to compare it to in order to know the severity of it. Second is that I'm pretty sure y'all knew about slavery. When y'all came up in school, they taught you about slavery. But let me ask y'all a question. And this is not from those individuals that come to my study group, but did you know that there was a whole system of slavery that was already in existence before the Atlantic slave trade happened on the west side of Africa, that was already going on the east side? For over 300 years on the east coast of Africa, slavery was already in effect.
Arab slave trade?
Huh?
Arabian slave trade?
Yeah, we talking the East Coast slave trade. The issue again is that it's important that we be specific. And what I mean by that is that you have to take into consideration that when people came in, so how we are identifying the people, whether they was Arabs, whether they were Muslims, because you could be an Arab and not a Muslim.
Right.
And then second is that at what time is this taking place? So for the 400 gruesome years that y'all talked about, slavery was going on in East Africa for over 300 years, and then after slavery ended in the West, slavery still went on in the East Coast, and it goes on today. So in the slavery in the West Coast was about 400 years. On the East Coast, it was 1,400 years. 1,400 years. On the West Coast, 400 years. Now, how did y'all miss that?
Because of the severity, I guess.
No, because you never read it. Nobody was it was never introduced to you. And then, no, but we never made it our business to look at world history in that kind of context in order to understand. See, most people, they look at history only to reflect themselves. But Dr. Clark said one thing, and that's why I got on this subject, because Dr. Clark said, if you want to understand African history, you got to read world history. You got to be white history. If you don't, you ain't going to never understand African history. But the issue, how I got on the subject, was Dr. Clark was talking about this guy named Hubert Harrison. And Hubert Harrison, he would talk about him that he was this greatest thinking joker that he called that ever lived at that time. So I was like, wait a minute. And then he started talking about the time and the people who lived during that time. And the guys were, this is the people that lived during this time. Langston Hughes, Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, Claude McKay, Richard B. Moore. I mean, powerhouse people. These was the powerhouse people.
Right.
And Dr. Clark said that the most serious thinker, the smartest individual, the most intellectual, and the most radical was Hubert Harrison. And I ain't never heard of this guy. I was like, who the hell is this guy? Right? Now, the thing was, I wasn't that moved because I had heard Dr. Clark make mention of this particular personality, but I didn't know who he was. What really, really made me go do the research was I was listening to a lecture by the guy who was Dr. Clark's mentor, and that was John G. Jackson. And John G. Jackson started talking about Hubert Henry Harrison as if though he was like some god or something. And I was like, well, who is this guy? I mean, like, who is? And the thing about it was Dr. John G. Jackson would say that, and he never went to school. He's a self-taught individual. Autodidact. And I was just blown away. So one day I decided to go, because as most people know me, I'm a book person. And at that time I was working in the book business, so I said, well, let me go find some information. But there was no book written about it. There was no information, not even a pamphlet that was available. And so what I did was I went to the Schomburg Library and I started looking at microfilm, you know, from back in the 20s and all of this kind of stuff. And I ran across this article that was written by this young white boy by the name of Jeff Perry, and it was in African American biographies that they have. It's a big book like so. And it has biographies of all African American, you know, personalities and figures and so forth. And I read this article, and it was written, and it talked about who Harrison was, where he was from, this, that, and the other, and I was just blown away about, they was talking about W.E.B. Du Bois. Now, y'all know what W.E.B. Du Bois to the damn Renaissance is. When you say W.E.B. Du Bois, in the modern world, they will say that W.E.B. Du Bois for black people was the greatest mind of the 20th century.
The scholar of scholars.
That's right. But he said, this is what he said. He said Harrison was the greatest mind he ever came across. He said he could read 5 books a night.
Completely.
You hear what I'm saying, 5 books a night. And I ain't talking about no run-of-the-mill stuff. Here was a guy that blew me away so deep because I was doing some research on Harrison, and it was based on an article that was in a 1921 New York Times article. And the article was about Hubert Harrison. He used to do street corner speaking. See, the ladder speaking and all of that y'all see in Harlem and all of that, it didn't start in Harlem. It started down at the Sub-Treasury in Wall Street. And Harrison was the guy that started it. He was the guy. And then he brought it from there to 134th Street and Lenox Avenue. See, before the Schomburg was there, that was called Speaker's Corner. But the baddest speakers in the black community would go there and speak. Here's a book. It's called Blood Relations by Irma Watkins Owens. Real powerful sister. And the subtitle of this book is called Caribbean Immigrants and the Harlem Community from 1900 to 1930. She has a chapter in here called the Stepladder Community. The Stepladder Community. And she talks about all of the individuals who used to be involved in that process. So I'm going to read a little bit just to give you an idea. And again, all of these individuals who I'm reading to you about, eventually they're going to be affiliated or associated with either socialism or communism. Socialism or communism. And I want you to understand that at that time in America, socialism and communism was very different than how we see it today.
Right.
Or even how it was seen in the 50s by McCarthy and those kind of guys. Because at that time, socialism, much less communism, was the new kid on the block. And it was looked at as this new concept, this new, philosophy that was going to bring about change in the world. Remember, when we think about communism, we're talking about 1912. 1912. And when you think about the Harlem Renaissance, that's 1900. Now, mind you, from 1900 to 1915, black people wasn't in Harlem. They were just going. They were in a place called San Juan Hill. That was their geographical location, where we had large concentration and enclaves of black people. And from there, which was in the 50s, mid to late 50s, going up, to the 70s, that was the geographical area at the time. And then not until 1900 did we begin to move to Harlem at the Peyton and Maggie, what's their last names off the top of my head? They were real estate dealers, because what had happened was at that time, Irish, Italian, Germans, and Jews lived in Harlem.
Where's San Juan Hill?
San Juan Hill, like I said, 50th Street, mid-50,
Hell's
5th
Kitchen.
Street, Hell's Kitchen, that's exactly right. From there, all the way up to about 77, 79, that was the geographical area. And most of black people and Caribbeans were concentrated in that area. See, a lot of us don't realize that during that time, the Caribbean community became strong because of labor. It was a labor issue. Because remember, after 1913, where the war started, and you got the whole issue, a lot of white boys went to war, they had a vacuum of labor. And remember, we were actually going through the transition from an agrarian society to an industrial society. Well, I shouldn't say a transition. In other words, the agrarian industry was now getting a new partner, and the partner was industry. In other words, the agrarian wasn't going to go nowhere, but it was going to change its spots in order to deal with the new influx of what the new economic economy would change. So what that did also do is these building and factories and things of that nature caused an issue where that we couldn't deal with the same labor that we was dealing with before. Because now we need educated individuals in order to work the machinery or to do X, Y, or Z, which is a different setup than, working farm, an agrarian setup. So what that did was you had an influx. That means that black people were still in the process of moving from south to, or should I say, I shouldn't say moving. I shouldn't say moving from south to north. I should say that they were migrating. And the reason I should say that is because it wasn't just north. Most of us don't realize that a large portion of Africans went west.
That's right.
And then a lot of other Africans went south. Trust, how could they go south? Where could they? Easy, because at that time, the major areas of slavery was North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, those particular. The areas that Florida and all of those were areas that literally at the earliest periods were controlled by the French. By the Spanish, excuse me. So whether you know it or not, the earliest city in the United States, the first and the earliest founded city in the United States is St. Augustine, Florida. St. Augustine, Florida. And Florida was controlled by the Spanish. It was a Spanish colony. Now, Florida at that time wasn't Florida you see today. It was a different Florida. Did y'all know Florida back then went from Nova Scotia in Canada, right? It went the whole East Coast, that means the whole East Coast, all the way down to Texas. That was Florida. See, we're looking at this little peninsula all the way down off the back end, when in reality, we talking about an area that was literally a third of the whole country. Because see, we don't realize that we look at America because of the language and the culture we speak, which is what? English. So we look at it based on that. But they wasn't here then. The guys that set this up were Portuguese and Spanish. Portuguese and Spanish. Portuguese and Spanish. But the majority of slaves that came to America, they didn't even come to America. You know how many slaves actually came from Africa to here? 10%. Think about that, 10%. Well, where all them damn Africans we got come from? 99% of them came from by way of Caribbean or South America. I should say the large of the migrating ones came from Caribbean or South America. But the majority of the infrastructure of Africans in America, as far as slaves were concerned, was through breeding. And the reason that was because in 1804 they outlawed slavery on the high seas in Europe. So you couldn't just go out and get slaves no more. And see, in the beginning, you couldn't do that either. See, remember, it was Nicholas V in 1450 that he literally gave Portugal the whole west coast of Africa. This is the Pope of Rome.
Right.
He went to them because it was the Spanish and the Portuguese who were fighting over newfounded land. So the Pope came in to settle the argument. But before that situation happened, the Portuguese, this is before the Spanish gets in the game, goes and decides that they're going to go and to explore to find new land. And this is not land I'm going to explore. Don't get it twisted. This is not about exploration. This is about first-hand, straight-up, in-your-face robbery. I mean, full-blast robbery. I'll tell you how deep it is. Pope Nicholas V created what is called a papal bull. These are edicts that are presented by the Pope as giving carte blanche to those individuals who are the recipient to do anything that they want to do with God, with God's assurance.
In other words, the law.
That's the law. And what he did was he gave Portugal the whole west coast of Africa, which meant, and he said this is what Pope Nicholas said. He said, if you come in contact with any people, he said, I don't want anything out the deal. All I want you to do is make them Christians. So what it meant also was that all of the west coast of Africa was owned, operated lock, stock, and barrel by the Portuguese government. And when the Spanish decided to get in the game, guess what happened? When they found new land, the problem was, how are they going to get labor for the land? Because, as you know, when they got to here and they started having problems with the natives, their position was, we have to find a new source of labor. But the issue was, when they got here, when the Spanish got here, their position was, how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? So it was easy. They created, in Spanish, they created a word called asiento. Asiento in Spanish means contract. And what they did was, these asientos were contracts that were made by Portugal in order to give access to, by Spain, in order to give access to land at the behest of the Portuguese. And how they got labor there was, they would sell these contracts to countries or corporations, big corporations. Back then, the biggest one was called the Dutch East Indian Corporation. And they were going around the world taking everybody's shit. It was a free-for-all, and that's what they were doing. But when the Spanish got here and they didn't have no labor, that was one way that they could do it. So in order for those individuals to come, the Spanish created those asientos, those contracts, and the provisions were based on this. In order for you to get the usage of the land, you had to provide labor and give me an annual stipend for the year, as well as say 5,000 slaves or 3,000 slaves, and that's how they got to populate it. The only problem is that no matter what country it was, including Spain, if they wanted to get slaves, they had to go to Portugal, because Portuguese are the ones that owned all of the slaves. They owned the land and the slaves. Now, mind you, they ain't went in there as no Africans, nothing. But this is how it was set up. And this is what set the foundation. So I'm just giving you a bird's eye kind of view going around about in regard to what was going on prior to the migration, and then eventually the migration, and then this period that we call the Harlem Renaissance. And remember, the term itself is a misnomer, because it really wasn't the Harlem Renaissance. It was the Renaissance of black people, period, but it happened all over different places in the United States. Chicago, Kansas City, LA, all of these were places where you had enclaves of Africans that had came either from South, West, Caribbean, or otherwise, and began to settle in certain areas in concentrated numbers. So that's why, you see all of these particular areas, and especially, the city areas, the first foundation of these city dwellings. So this is where a lot of this came. So the acceptance of a concept like a socialism or a communism during that period of time was pretty easy to do, because everybody was looking for something that anything was different than the shit we was doing where we came from. And that was working on a plantation and mob violence. That's what they was doing. So to escape that, they went north. So this is why it was easy for those individuals who came north to be solicited by people like Noble Drew Ali, or Elijah Muhammad, or Marcus Garvey. Because all of that never existed before.
Right.
We ain't know nothing about no Islam. And then all of a sudden, remember, the people that are viewing this now are not looking at it as something foreign. They looking at it as a medium for freedom, for identity. You see what I'm saying? So we can't think of socialism in the political context that we see it today versus how they were seeing it at that time, in order to address the conditions that they were being confronted with at that particular time. And they were at that time escaping, bondage, mob violence, professional opportunity, reading, all of these things that they could not do. Where that now you're getting that opportunity. So when Dr. Clark, gave me that information, and I went out and I studied Hubert Harrison by way of Dr. John G. Jackson. And by the way, I want to say this: all of the people that I mentioned, you should have a pencil out, and you want to get these people's names, and you want to go and find out who they are, whether they're the Dr. Clarks or Dr. John G. Jackson or Hubert Henry Harrison, or, because they are all...
We don't know that already?
Say it again?
We don't know that already?
Who's we?
Those that don't. Everybody in there knows that.
No, you ain't the only one in here. It's people right here.
They know that because
No,
that's
they
why
don't.
they're here.
So, again, you want to be able to have a clarity of who those individuals are and what their particular contributions are. And second is that when we think of socialism and communism today, we think of them as boogeymen. Versus at that time, they were looked at more as saviors. They were looked at as saviors. And one of the reasons was because at that time, anything that was associated primarily with the mainstream white society was looked at as a detriment to black people. The only problem is, through all of that, we still had this in our hearts, deep hope that they was going to change. They was going to let us in. We was going to eventually be a part of the big experiment.
Especially after wars.
Well, they used the term melting pot.
Isn't that what all societies did at some point?
Well, no, not all of them, because remember, certain societies that are so-called culturally monolithic, they don't have to go through all that. What they do is that they separate themselves based on the very small differences that they have even amongst themselves. So, it's either Mandarin Chinese or such and such.
Yeah.
But they are everybody Chinese, you know what I'm saying? Where that, in black people, it was a different story. Where that, even though the benefit of individuals now that come here and they say they're from Africa, they know where they're from. Most of us never knew where we were from. Much less know our name, our religion, none of that. Not even a little bit. And what it meant was that anything that we could associate that latched on to that, we maintained. Now, one thing that I can say, all of those people, mostly all of them from Reconstruction back, one thing that they had as an advantage on all of us, and that is they had no problem. They knew they were Africans. They knew it.
Who the enemy was, right?
Right. No, yeah, that too, but in a certain sense. They knew they were Africans. It wasn't no quasi. They knew they were Africans.
Absolutely.
In other words, when Richard Allen created the AME Church, he didn't say AME for nothing. He said it because he knew that's how they see themselves. He knew that was the origin. So when they say African, Methodist, Episcopalian, that's what they're talking about. And that's not just that. There were a lot of things that in the forefront were African.
Definitely.
Versus, as time went on, we go through the process of the Pavlovian conditioning. And we become Negroes and colored people
Right.
and black people.
And hip-hop culture.
That's right. All of these things are new added features as underpinnings to the cultural fabric and coat that they give us. So this is why this played such a part. And then second, from 1900 to about 1930, communism was a legitimate political party. Let me say that again. Communism was a legitimate political party. As a matter of fact, if you go back and look, you'll find that they had mayors and certain individuals in high-ranking positions that were Communist Party members.
Well, it was accepted then.
That's right, very well accepted. Very, very well accepted. The only problem is that we only know the history of communism from McCarthy on. You see? So it's like saying that the only thing you know about the swastika is from Germany.
That's where it originated.
You see? Mike, give them an idea. How old do you think the swastika symbol is?
Goes back to chemistry.
Predates.
You heard what he just said?
It predates that.
In other words, it goes back about 5,000 years. 5,000.
Further than that.
5,000. Now, what that means is that, what he's saying is that there was no Jews then. They didn't exist. There's no Jesus, didn't exist. We talking about the reality of history. They didn't exist. And we saying that these particular attributes had already been in existence in Africa. The only problem is most of us didn't know it. We think it started here. So did y'all know that right now, if you jump on a train, take your ass down to Canal Street, go to Chinatown, go into one of the medicinal healing shops that they have down there, with you have for herbs, you'll see that insignia, that swastika, damn near on in all kinds of ways on various herb packages in the medical pharmacy.
It was in India for years.
India, same thing. Well, India is the basic form where we get the word swastika. Is Sanskrit. That's where the term comes from. It's Sanskrit.
Also add Indian Aryan race. Aryan.
Yeah, but see, people get they got this warped idea of what an Aryan is. Anybody know what an Aryan is or where the Aryans come from?
A-R-Y or A-R-I?
A-R-Y.
As in India. How about roots in India?
No. Mm-mm. Go look it up. Aryan's origin is Iran.
Oh, right.
Iran.
Right.
Most of us think when we think Aryan, we think Germany.
Like the Aryan
Isn't
nation.
is that part of that Turanian?
No, again, see, the issue here is, if you really want to know what people follow their what?
Tongue.
Their language. Because their language is going to give away all of the truth about who they really are. Because one thing is for sure, most European languages go all the way back to one major language. You know, and if you notice, they don't say that the earliest language in Europe is European. What do they say it is?
The earliest language?
Yeah, the earliest language in Europe, what do they call that language?
Gaelic or something?
No. I'm not saying what the language is. I'm telling you, what do they call the overall language?
Indo-European.
Right. How can European languages be Indo?
It's not.
Yes, it is. But the issue is,
It is, but it's not theirs.
Yeah. Again, the issue is, when you see a word, anytime you see a word, the first thing you want to do is ask yourself, what is the meaning of the word? Do not read the sentence without a dictionary. Get the dictionary, look up the word, and find out clearly what it means. Then, after you find out the definition, then I want you to go back and Google the word for its etymological definition in history. So that way you'll know whether that word is appropriate to be used at the time for the definition that you're reading, or for the ancient one by which it has its origin in. You see what I'm saying? But we don't know nothing about that because we're too busy assuming that what the author wrote is true.
Or that he knew there was a difference between the words.
That's again correct. And that's what our job is.
Well, when Germans say they are Aryans, they're saying that in the ancient world, they were the light of the world.
Well, they're saying that, but they're making a claim in regard to a particular pedigree. Remember, Aryans didn't come from Germany. I mean, the concept didn't come from Germany. The concept of Aryanism came right here from the United States and the eugenics program with John Davenport and Madison Grant and all of them jokers.
Right.
Remember, Hitler read The Passing of the Great Race by Madison Grant. That's where he got this idea of the master race, and they ain't know nothing about that. They ain't know nothing about it. It was Lothrop Stoddard who came up with that.
Clashing tides.
Clashing tides and rising tides of color. He was the individual who talked about it. Where did he get it from? Go ask Dr. Ben. Dr. Ben say he learned it from Dr. Clark. Dr. Clark say he learned it from John G. Jackson. John G. Jackson say he learned it from Hubert Harrison. They really was trying to get out of the situation that they find themselves in. This was not an ideological or a political quest. It was a quest for freedom, I keep telling y'all. So stop looking at this as if though they were trying to make some political analysis, and no, they was trying to get their ass out of some hot shit they was in that led their asses all the way to the position that they find themselves in. So communism and socialism, in not a political sense, but in a social and a cultural sense, was a sense of relief.
So that escape route.
Exactly. All of the hell you was catching, any relief would be okay.
That's true.
So that's why it wasn't easy to receive a Master Farad Muhammad in your community and he ain't look like you. That's why it was easy for Noble Drew Ali to come up with an Islamic concept, and nobody know nothing about no Islam. Ain't nobody know nothing about no Islam. And eventually you get, individuals who join the group. What's funny, I was showing Mike, this is a book, if you ever get a chance, it's called Harlem on My Mind, a cultural, capital of Black America, 1900 to 1968. And what's significant about this particular book is you have all of the pictures from that period. So I was showing him that here, like for instance, he was looking at this picture of Duke Ellington. Y'all ever seen a picture of Duke like that?
No.
The girls was all over him on that. You know what I mean? Like a cheap suit, they was all over him.
I've seen that before.
Right. And hold on. This is a picture of Marcus Garvey. You can see Marcus Garvey right here. But one of the things that most of the time y'all don't see is this: the Yarmouth. This is one of the Black Star Line ships. You see that? The Yarmouth. And then here you can see, before there was the Fruit of Islam, there was the African Legions. That's the African Legions right there. And if you look at them and you look at the Nation of Islam's FOI, they kind of close. They are kind of close. Mm-hmm. And then check this out. If you look at these here are the Black Cross nurses. Look at how they look.
UGT.
I'm just throwing out some things here.
Just saying.
And it's just giving you an idea on how a lot of these individuals were thinking and the direction in which they were going. This is a very good page here because this is a page that shows you a cross combination of some real powerful people. One individual is, all of y'all know, are all of y'all familiar with a guy by the name of Adam Clayton Powell?
Yeah.
Yeah, Adam Clayton Powell.
Junior or senior?
Do you know senior?
Do I know senior?
Yeah.
Not like as much as I know junior.
You ever seen a senior?
Yeah.
What do you look like?
Almost right.
He said you almost look white. There you go, right there. There you go. Adam Clayton Powell Sr.
Where?
Well, I'm gonna pass it around so y'all can take a look. But the issue here is that I'm gonna just give you an idea. This is, as you can see, is W.E.B. Du Bois. As you can see, it has a picture of the Crisis magazine, which he was, at that time, the overseer of. He was the editor-in-chief of the organ because he was defined as the mouthpiece of the NAACP. Let trust say this and be very clear. W.E.B. Du Bois was not, and let me say this again, was not a founding member of the organization. Did he come in the very early period? Yes. Yes. But a founding member? No.
Right.
The 4 founding members of the NAACP are all white.
Jews.
They were not all Jews. See, This is what I'm saying. Did you go check?
They love that. They
Yeah,
have to
everything
throw
is
the shoe out.
Jewish.
They have to throw that shit
Yes,
out.
ma'am.
Just on that note, I wanted to ask you your thoughts on Rabbi Matthew Ford in that whole mix.
Yeah, but Rabbi Ford actually was a part of Marcus Garvey's group.
Right, that's what I wanted
Right.
to
So he didn't just have Moors. He had Rabbi Ford, which was Jews. He also had Moors in his organization. But you do know that Garvey himself wasn't a Jew or a Moor. He was a Catholic. And a staunch Catholic, too. Which was kind of funny at the time he was a Catholic. Right. Roman Catholic. But in this here, it shows you Langston Hughes over here. It shows, well, all these pictures here are Langston Hughes. Right here is probably one of the most greatest individuals, activists of the 20th century. I mean, he's greater than Martin Luther King. Let me say that again. He's greater than Martin Luther King.
Point to the picture, son.
This is him right here.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, you wouldn't even have a march on Washington if it wasn't for him. Martin Luther King didn't even have to show up, and it still would have went on. If Martin Luther King never ever said a word, it still would have went on.
That's the Pullman guy?
That's exactly. Who is it? A. Philip Randolph.
Yeah.
A. Philip Randolph. As a matter of fact, A. Philip Randolph convened the March on Washington in 1940.
That's right.
1940. Y'all are familiar with some 1963 stuff? Well, even in 1963, did y'all know that Mr. Martin Luther King, Mr. Lewis, Ralph Abernathy, what's the other one? The one that became, No, the one that became, Andy Young. And none of these individuals, none of them was involved in the organization and the formation of the March on Washington.
But they were young.
Nah, they wasn't that young.
They were like 17.
What are you talking about? This is 1963. He wasn't no 17.
Andrew Young?
Andrew Young wasn't no 17 in 1963.
All right.
Come on.
He was already a college graduate.
Yes.
Maybe Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, the issue here
They
is
were all college graduates. That's SCOC.
yeah, but
That's only one of 6.
right, and the issue, what I'm trying to get you to understand is these are the poster boys for the civil rights movement, but they wasn't the people that was doing the work. They wasn't. When we think of SNP, we think of Stokely Carmichael, but it was started by Ella Baker.
That's right.
How many people know Ella Baker? She was one of the baddest black women that ever stepped foot in the civil rights movement. And it wouldn't be as radical as it was without her.
She was short.
If you seen Stokely Carmichael, it was because of her. If you seen Rat Brown, it was because of her.
Master organizer.
Master organizer. Just like A. Philip Randolph. But A wasn't doing the organizing.
He was hitting money.
A was the mouthpiece. He was like the Barry White of activism.
That's right.
When you hear his voice, he sounded like Barry. And they loved him. They loved him. But the reason he became such a mover and shaker was because of this gay guy that he had right beside his side. He was the baddest organizer in the civil rights movement, and everybody knew it. Everybody knew he was gay, but they keep that shit on the hush-hush because that's right. Bear Rustin. That means he did the organizing for 1940, he did the organizing for 1963. Bear Rustin.
Wasn't A. Philip Randolph involved with the poll reporters?
Of course! There wouldn't be no polling porters if it wasn't for A. Philip Randolph.
Well, he organized.
He was the organizer, but the issue was he literally brought them into the mainstream of the labor movement.
Union.
No, movement. The reason I'm saying that is because, see, at that time we have to take into consideration that the labor community was very anti-black.
They were all Irish.
They were anti-black. There was only certain, one of the reasons we go into socialism and communism because there were certain unions that decided that they was going to throw that aspect of it out. So the Knights Labor Organization, the first thing they did was they was like, no, we're going to go out and try to solicit black individuals because it was all about skilled labor.
What do you mean, throw what aspect of it out?
In other words, the aspect of the racial issues pertaining to not allowing you in this guild or that guild because you was black.
Oh, okay. It's about
They was like, no, it's about labor. See, remember the underpinning. So the people that we are talking about, like A. Philip Randolph, you got James Weldon Johnson. Y'all do know him.
Yeah.
Lift every voice.
Lift every voice and sing.
Horrible song.
As I was telling Mike, the baddest guy on here, and every one of these persons is super bad. But for me, the baddest guy was this guy right down here.
Yes, sir.
Casper Holstein.
Let us
He's a
see.
gangster.
Who?
Cold gangster.
Let's see the picture.
Like
Chuck.
Gotti gangster.
Let's see the picture.
That's Casper Holstein.
By the middle.
In the
I
middle.
don't know him.
Let me read a little bit about Casper. Casper made the book. This is the gangster that made the books.
Casper the Friendly Holstein.
Casper the friend.
Bad dude.
But the reason that Casper becomes a significance because, see, the gangster community was the community that was the underpinning for the finances of the infrastructure of the black community. Did you know blacks couldn't go to banks and get no goddamn loans?
Queenie was doing that.
Right. So guys like Panama Francis and Casper Holstein, all these guys were the individuals who were the bankers of the community. Y'all heard of Madam Stephanie Sinclair?
Right.
She was the baddest number runner in all of Harlem. Bumpy Johnson worked for her. She didn't work for him.
Right.
She was a bad lady. She didn't play no games. You get a shit.
Dust you off.
That's right. You be pushing daisies.
She was Caribbean.
If you don't think she was bad, go ask Dutch Schultz about it.
Right.
He was one of the baddest Jewish gangsters that ever lived. The only guy that he was afraid of was Lucky. That's the only guy he was afraid of. Everybody else, he was like, I don't care how big you are. Listen, I'll kill you and not even think twice about it. But there was one person he knew he would not even think twice about crossing, and that was Lucky.
Lucky.
Because he knew Lucky was about business. It was all business, and it ain't about friendship. And he knew that he, what is it, Arthur Schlussenheim. That's what's his name, Arthur Schlussenheim. But he had this idea that he was going to come in the black neighborhood and that he was going to decide that he was going to Ralph Bunch. He was going to push up on a black woman and take hers. Boy, he did the wrong thing. He did the real wrong thing. Madam Stephanie Sinclair was from Martinique. Spoke fluent French. But she was a gangster at heart, bro. She didn't play no games. And you got to remember is that number running started in the black community. And then the white individuals decided to get on the ball game. I was telling Mike earlier that if y'all don't ever do something, write this down, write this name down. I want y'all to go look up the baddest black gangster that ever lived, come out of Chicago. His name Eddie Jones. Eddie Jones. You wouldn't know Sam Giancana if it wasn't for Eddie Jones. See, the guy that took over for what's his name? For Al Capone was a guy by the name of Tony Accardo. They used to call him Joey the Bat because he used to beat jokers with a baseball bat. And his position was he thought that Al Capone was too extreme, that he was too flashy, and he brought too much heat on the game. Because he was out there wearing these nice suits, telling everybody how many judges and politicians he had in his pocket and all of that. So when the boys decided to come down on him, it was real easy. So when he eventually goes to jail, Tony takes over. But Tony's position is, I don't want to do none of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the whole mob operation from Chicago, straight and take it.
The history of the Illinois state lottery traced back To the black man who created
Hold on.
policy.
Yeah, I want you, because he's trying to get in. That's the cap.
Who's Harriet Mann-John?
Don't worry, listen, you read it later, don't read it now. Now, the thing about what Eddie did and the group behind those individuals was that at that time, you have to take into consideration that the mainstream mob, their major revenue was bootleg, illegal alcohol. And then when Prohibition was in, that was great. But when they legalized alcohol, that made all of that revenue went out the window. So they had to find another means in order to supplement that revenue that was coming in. And, Tony and them was like, we need to find something else. They was already into prostitution and gambling, but alcohol was a big portion of their revenue. So what had happened was Sam Giancana, he was a low-level gangster, but he had went to jail. And while he was in jail, that's when he met Eddie Jones. And Eddie was telling him about how much money the black community was making by this thing they call numbers, with pennies. He said they was making so much money that, Sam went immediately, as soon as he got out of jail, he went straight to Tony. He said, look, man, he said, them black guys over there, he said, man, they making millions out of pennies.
Well, that's why the mob ignored it for years.
That's right, they ignored it because it was pennies. Yeah, they was like, man, that's kids play. And when they seen the amount of money that they was making, they was like, oh, hell no. So what Sam did was, Sam said, well, he went to Tony Accardo and said, this is what I'm going to do. He said, I'm going to take this shit. And I guess Tony was like, what you mean? He said, man, look. He said, I'm going to get him to show me everything that he knows, and then I'm going to take it. So he was like, oh, shit, get out of here. So, that's exactly what he do. He went, he pushed up on Eddie Jones, and Eddie was like, man, what you doing, man? I gave you this shit. He was like, man, that's the idea. We gangsters. This is about takeover. This is the hostile takeover. You gotta, and they eventually this is Sam Giancana. Now, I don't know whether you ladies, y'all know who Sammy is. Sam Giancana?
That the book Double Cross?
That's correct. Sam Giancana becomes the mob boss of the Chicago family called the Outfit. At the behest of, he doesn't become the boss, he becomes the front man. The real boss is Tony Accardo, who's in the suburbs of Chicago. But he don't want to be seen in the front, so he sends Sam Giancana out. Now Sammy is the flashy guy, smooth, really nice guy. He looked like he's like a shorter version of Frank Sinatra.
He like them women.
That's right. Dark glasses, smooth guy, walk, And Sammy is like the women, but one of the women that he liked is a woman that another guy liked.
Always like that.
Right. So he's sleeping with this woman named Judith Campbell. And come to find out, the President of the United States sleeping with Judith Campbell. John Kennedy sleeping with Judith Campbell. Sam Giancana sleeping with Judith Campbell. We could imagine what that bed pillow talk was all about.
She was a straight up strange.
Yeah, but let me say this again. See, we call them hoes. But the reality is, they got more inside knowledge than they have for anybody.
What did they do with it?
JFK was a straight hoe.
Huh?
JFK was a straight hoe.
JFK?
Yes, he was. He was a straight up, he was always with different women. That was his thing.
So was mine.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the ex-president of the U.S. That's what I'm talking
No, you got it wrong. The whole Kennedy family.
All right, thank
Well,
you.
you been smoking. He has something wrong with him?
Yeah,
He don't know who the Kennedy father is? He don't know who Robert was?
Yeah, Robert
Don't you, let me say this again, this is for the young ladies. Do y'all know that Robert Kennedy, the brother of John Kennedy, at the same time was doing Maryland?
Yes.
At the same time.
I never heard.
Both of them.
Keep it in the family, I suppose.
Both of them.
That's how they do it. That's how royal jokers do it.
Yeah, but just for clarity, you have to understand, don't look at it in 2023 the same way it
That's
was.
right. You can't look at it like
White men have always had an agreement
That's right.
with their wife that
That's
you
right.
stay right there and anything I do outside the door is none of your damn business.
That's
And
right.
it's always been that way for the last 400 years here in America. So don't look at it with new eyes like, oh, they was running around. White men always had that understanding.
It's
with their wife.
still running around, whether it's an agreement or not. It's still running around. So you can look at it. You can look at it
To look at them as
1756
a
eyes.
whole is not the proper context.
Yes, it is.
No.
It's straight up.
You have
Straight up. These women weren't doing nothing for the nation. It's not like they were Cleopatra.
No,
These
I'm
were
talking
booty
about the
bumpers.
Kennedys. No, Mike referred to them, the Kennedys as hoes. And I'm saying
Ladies
they
of-
would do what
ladies
any
of the
powerful
night.
white man would do.
for years.
And do what any powerful black man would do, because we ain't sitting around
They
nothing.
made a movie about you.
Straight up
Say
prostitute.
that again.
They made a movie about you.
Y'all acting like black men don't do that shit.
Say that again.
They made a movie about your boy Eddie Jones.
They made a movie by who?
Eddie Jones,
Oh, what movie?
King of Kings.
Yeah, but that's actually a book.
That's your book.
I got that shit home on my shelf. I know the author.
He be
He's out of
wrong
Chicago.
info.
Right. He's out of Chicago. I know him.
Only Eddie Jones I know played for the Lakers and they bumped him off because of Kobe. He was a bad football.
But to move on, the issue here is to look at the significance of the relationship of where black people were at that particular time, how they were moving up, and what was the driving force behind it. And in this case, as I said before, the issue of migration was one of the driving forces, but another issue was being able to look at their future and find what they had available to them that they could really reach these particular aspirations as fast as they possibly can. And when black people got like to the north and the west, their major concern was to try to rid themselves of anything that reminded them from where they came from. You know, the conditions from where they came from. So it was kind of easy for them to accept, a Master Farad Muhammad or a Marcus Garvey or a person like that or a Richard Allen because their position was, well, I ain't going to church to sit in the balcony no more. I'm not. I mean, why do I have to do that? That's what Richard Allen said. If I'm a Christian like you a Christian, and we all God's children, why do I gotta be up there and y'all get to be down here? I'm pretty sure God ain't down with that. So what began to happen? No, but in this case, what I'm saying is that this is why that things like socialism and communism and Islam and things became very appealing to the masses. And it wasn't by chance that those organizations grew by leaps and bounds. Y'all don't realize how big the UNIA was. I mean, it was huge. Like she said, Rabbi Ford, I mean, it was just so many components to the UNIA. So many components. Business, political, cultural, religious. I mean, they had their hands in everything. The only problem is, the biggest problem for the UNIA was Marcus Garvey. I mean, that was the problem.
You gotta explain that.
The problem is that Marcus Garvey's ego was so huge that he literally caused the destruction of the organization.
Wow.
All of the people that become the right hand, the greatest minds of the day was working for him.
And he ran them all out.
He ran them, every one of them. Johnny Bruce, W.A. Domingo. Jay Rogers was him.
Jay Rogers.
Jay Rogers worked with him. Hubert Harrison was his editor for at least 3 years. That's when the newspaper became the most radical newspaper in all of the world. See this t-shirt I got on? It says that Hubert Harrison was the individual who would call Harlem's most radical individual. You know who gave him that title? That Harrison was the most radical individual in Harlem of that time. It was that guy I just showed you. A. Philip Randolph said that he was the most radical. A. Philip Randolph said that. A. Philip Randolph had a newspaper called The Messenger. This book, it says No Crystal Stairs, written by Theodore Cornweevil. And as you can see, it says Black Life and The Messenger from 1917 to 1928. Let me tell you about a story in that. And that's how I got to read the story about the story that I'm getting ready to tell you. I found this story not in this book. It's in this book, but I found the story in a microfilm newspaper article, 1921, in New York Times, 1921, newspaper article about Hubert Harrison in a street corner speaking, a soapbox speaking under J.P. Morgan office, where he galvanized 11,000 people standing on the street corner.
That's Wall Street.
Wall Street. And they had to rope off the area and everything. So I go to the Schomburg, I go to the microfilm, I'm looking up all of this freaking microfilm, and you know, after a while, that shit like blinding, you know? So, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm just flipping, and then all of a sudden I flipped the page that I was reading that the article was on. I flipped the page, and there was an article on that page, on the next page that said, Garvey must go. I was like, oh shit, what is this? So I read this article, and the article is about, the writer is writing about, this article was about, actually it was about A. Philip Randolph. See, A. Philip Randolph, they were communist, socialist, Leninists, but communist individuals, him and Chandler Owens. So they would go around and they would talk about class struggle and all of this kind of stuff, and they would call Marcus Garvey a charlatan. They said he was a faker, that he ain't really was doing the right stuff. And they would be on the soapbox, standing on the corner, talking all bad about Mr. Garvey and this, that, and the other. So the Marcus Garvey members would be standing across the street listening. So after he got finished talking one day, one of the members went over there and said, man, you better stop talking about Mr. Garvey. You know, you better stop talking about Mr. Garvey. Something's going to happen to you. Like that. So he was like, I don't care. You know, he ain't nothing but a charlatan, just taking black people money. So one day, a couple days after that, A. Philip Randolph is in his office, and they get a package. And A goes to the package, opens it up. Inside the box is a hand, a cut-off hand, a cut-off white man's hand. And with a note that says, if you don't stop talking about Mr. Garvey, your head is going to be in the box. Now that story is in this book, but I originally found it in a microfilm article in 1921 about that article I was looking for Harrison. And what it also indicated was the rivalries that went along with personalities. So when we talk about these great personalities, there were a lot of rivals that went on. And a lot of the rivals, see, like right now, when a joker want to get mad or talk bad about you, where they go to?
Social media.
Social media, go to YouTube. Well, back then, every black person, if you had something you want to talk about it, you went to the newspapers. But you didn't go to everybody had their own newspaper. See, Marcus Garvey had the Negro World. You had W.E.B. Du Bois had The Crisis.
Right.
Monroe Trotter had the Boston Guardian. I mean, it was newspapers everywhere, 800 newspapers. Y'all know 800? If you ever get a chance, see this book right here, you want to read this book. It says Voices of a Black Nation by Theodore Benson. He wrote that book and he also wrote this book. It's called Black Power and the Garvey Movement. But in this book, it tells you about the rivalries with all of the black personalities and the organizations, and then the fights they had, and they literally voiced their opinion in these articles. So if you see here, it says,
Get in front of the camera.
Africa for the Africans. And then it got the Crisis magazine, February 1919, and it tells you about the story. And then you go over here, and they got one on,
Get in front of the camera,
on capitalism. This is by George Patmore.
In front of the
by George Patmore, you know, who was a communist, who came from...
Military man.
He was a military man, but he was his major claim to fame was that they were going to change the world's perception of black people.
Right.
So when we think of revolutionaries, and when we even think of Pan-Africanism, the term Pan-Africanism isn't African. That means it didn't originate from Africans in Africa. Pan-African originated in the Caribbean. It comes from Trinidad. The father of Pan-Africanism at that time was C.L.R. James, H. Sylvester Williams, and George Patmore, whose real name, George Patmore, is a pen name. His real name is Malcolm Nurse. Malcolm Nurse. That's George Patmore's real name. And in this book,
Stay in front of the camera. Stay in front of the camera,
hold
Chris.
on. In this book, let me show you something. All of these are black newspapers.
Wow. A lot of them were Caribbean.
All of them black newspapers. Listen, half the people that y'all call leaders, their mothers and fathers come from the Caribbean. Malcolm X, where do you think his mama was from? Grenada. Marcus Garvey, J. Rogers was from Negril. You know, Richard B. Moore was from Barbados. Cyril Briggs, who started the African Blood Brotherhood, he was from Nevis. Same place Alexander Hamilton was from.
Right.
George James from Ghana.
Well, you got George James, and then you got, what's his name? You got C.L.R. James. You cannot talk about class struggle without C.L.R. James. Impossible. And every one of them, they were driven by socialism or communism. The greatest book written about the subject is Pan-Africanism or Communism by George Patmore, the guy who I just told you his name is Malcolm Nurse. This guy is from Trinidad. When Kwame Nkrumah becomes independent nation in Ghana, you know who he comes, you know who he gets for his attaché, his director of African affairs? He don't get an African. He don't get a Ghanaian. He go and get George Patmore.
Stay in front of the camera.
He goes and gets George Patmore. George Patmore becomes the official representative in the Ghanaian government on African affairs. Think about that. Did y'all know there was a little short guy from Harlem who became the editor of the newspaper for the Ghanaian government? His name was John Henry Clark.
That's right.
John.
Right.
Why you gotta call him short?
Because I like people short.
I can't deal with it.
Some things that are real good are in small packages.
Whatever, pygmy.
But the reason I'm saying this is to give you an idea on the influence of these concepts at a time where they were so important. Because black people at that time would literally jump on just about anything if it was going to rid them of the situation that they found themselves in. So, just to give you an idea, the personalities, let me just read a little something to you, just to give you an idea. No. Nope, it's this one. Okay. Now, if you give me a short brief, I want to read some material to you just to bring you in to frame of some material from an academic perspective so that we get an idea of some of the personality, and then we'll discuss, a little further. So just bear with me as I read to you some of this material. The book that I'm going to be reading from is called Holding Aloft the Banner of Ethiopia. It's written by Winston James. The subtitle is Caribbean Radicalism in the Early 20th Century America. Caribbean Radicalism in Early 20th Century America. And again, written by Winston James. Now, the book was originally published by Verso Press, and it was published originally in 1998. The chapter that I'm going to be reading from is chapter 5, and again, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I'm going to just give you some idea in regard to some of the personalities, the direction, and also some personal stuff that I want to tell you about. The name of the chapter is called Dimensions and Main Currents of Caribbean Radicalism in America. Hubert Harrison, the African Blood Brotherhood, and the UNIA. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of y'all are familiar with the UNIA. Are you familiar with the African Blood Brotherhood? No? Anybody else? Okay, good. We're going to talk about it. But the African Blood Brotherhood is probably the most radical organization of its day. It was the first armed struggle organization before there was a Black Panther Party, a Deacons for Self-Defense. These were the individuals who got together to protect the Black community.
What year?
This was 1920. Well, remember, the Tulsa, Oklahoma was in 21. So I would say.
They were there too.
Yeah, well, I was just they was the one that how it got started.
Right.
The issue is that, and you can find out about that, how it got started in this book. It tells you the story behind what actually happened in order when Dick Rowland is the individual's name. He was the Shoeshine individual that they say that accosted a white woman in an elevator. And that's what started the rise. But no, this is called Black Power and the Garvey Movement by Theodore Vincent. This is the first book of the. Let me tell you real fast about this book. One day, while I was reading the book, when I first got it, I was reading the book, and in the first introduction of the book, the guy who's writing the book tells about how this guy by the name of Leonard Jeffries, consulted him and gave him all of the fucking information. So I'm in my hometown in Newark, New Jersey, and I run into Dr. J, and I say, Doc, you know Theodore Vincent? He said, man, that name sounds familiar. So I said, it's a white boy who wrote a book on Marcus Garvey. He said, man, that sounds familiar. I said, well, he dedicated the book to you, say that you was the one that considered. He said, yeah, I know that, I don't remember the book. So,
He don't remember.
So we start talking about it, and in this book, it gives accolades to Dr. J and everything. But in the book, that's significant is that he actually documented some very important periods in the Harlem Renaissance era that normally is not highlighted or underscored with a certain amount of detail. So when we hear stories, a lot of times we hear stories far as our history, we hear them in romantic ways. We don't hear them in historical ways. You see, and that's a problem because we think what we think in the movie is what happened, but that's not what happened. You know? So you can't, like, you see the movie of Malcolm X? I want to say this clearly. Malcolm never put his head in the toilet seat, never. He never put his head in the toilet seat, never. Now, did Trust say that that's a bad thing? No. But what I want to know is accuracy. You know what I'm saying? Now, did Trust expect accuracy from a melodrama? No, I don't.
Gotta have some jokes.
That's right, you gotta have some jokes. Right. So my thing is that anytime y'all see a melodrama on TV, stop getting upset that they didn't portray you right. Because that's not what it's due.
Especially when you ain't put up no
Well,
money.
he'll tell you, entertainment takes liberties.
Exactly.
And the object, the other thing is, whether it's entertainment or artistic,
License.
that's right, they take liberties. Now, if you really want accurate material, watch a documentary. Go watch a documentary. And then criticize them for that. But don't go watch a melodrama like these jokers did with the Woman King and say, well, oh, it didn't do so and such. I was like, stupid, shut up. It's a melodrama. You got people talking about, oh, she didn't do this and it didn't do that. I was like, it's not that kind of movie.
Go read the history.
Right. There's a difference between watching a movie on Jack Johnson versus go watching Ken Burns' Jack Johnson.
Right.
That's two different things. And when you see and understand the significance of that, that will give you a better understanding. But let me go on. And just bear with me, like I said, as I go through this. Dimensions and Currents of Caribbean Radicalism in America. Hubert Harrison, the African Blood Brotherhood, and the UNIA. Caribbean migrants were indeed present in socialist and black nationalist organizations in numbers well out of their proportion to their weight within the American population. Moreover, many held leadership positions within such movements. Caribbeans were in conspicuous evidence within the socialist and communist parties, as well as within black nationalist associations such as the Universal Negro Improvement Association, with an estimated membership running into millions globally. Now, the story is that he had over 2 million members on 3 continents. That's not good. That's not excellent. That is way beyond extraordinary. Because remember, we're talking about no radio, no television, none of that. 3 continents?
His Instagram would have been crazy today.
Did y'all know what was the primary means of transporting his message?
The newspaper?
Yes. But how did you transport the newspaper?
Not with the boats.
Yes, you did.
Newspapers.
No, how you transported it was,
Ships.
no, Pullman car porters.
Trade.
Black men decided, because they wouldn't give them certain stuff in regard to access to job opportunities and everything on the trains, so what they did was real easy. They gave the trains to the carmen porters and they dropped them off in every town they came.
Right, that was secret.
That was so smooth. So smooth. Distribution. And they did the same thing, not just on the trains, they did it on boats. That's how it ended up in Mexico and yeah, all over the place. Right. Did y'all know that Marcus Garvey had a chapter in South Africa? Yes. We just talking about a huge. But let me go on. It says no one knows what proportion of the membership of the socialist and communist parties of the UNIA was of Caribbean or any other origin. There are, not surprisingly, no comprehensive or reliable figures aggregating the membership of these organizations on the basis of race or national origin. In other words, what he's saying is that they wanted to find out what were the numbers in comparison from the individuals from particular places of origin in the Caribbean, or what was disparaging differences between those numbers and the African indigenous individuals from here in the States. But they're saying is that we don't have any data on it. It says that there is, however, evidence pertaining to these matters that is good and strong. Contemporaries were insistent that Caribbean membership in the UNIA in the 1920s, especially in New York City, substantially exceeded the Caribbean population's weight of 21.4, 20.0, and 0.7% of the black population. So they're saying that between 21% all the way down to at 0.7% of the black population here in different areas. So if you went to different areas, it could be as low as 0.7 and as high as 21.4. It says that that the first black members of the Communist Party of the United States were Caribbean. What does that say? What do you think that says? Mike, what do you think that says? That black people have been here way before the Caribbean individuals get here. So why did they become the first converts?
Well, I'd say obviously they were predisposed to something prior to getting here, and so their minds were, in a real sense, a little more progressive than people who just came out of slavery, people who just came out of convict leasing and all time.
Right, and the issue is that you are correct 100%. The other added feature is it would also be the very nature of the education.
Right.
The education becomes the primary factor. So,
because that's a black person who knows about class.
Nothing. Not a click, even a click. So, but if you came from the Caribbean, remember, you had educational experience that was quite different than anything was going on here in the States. And especially, I'm talking about just an educational experience, white, black, or otherwise, versus what was going on here in the States. See, y'all got this idea that public education was a rampant, a thing in America. It didn't exist. It's black people that literally started the very nature of public education.
Right, Reconstruction.
Oh, Reconstruction. Go read Ira Aldridge. Ira Aldridge. He's a, what do you call that? He's a theater, what do they call that? Thespian.
Oh, an actor.
Right, he's an actor. But he spent a lot of times on building private institutions for black people in order to get education. Did y'all know that the black schools that were in the South also taught white poor kids?
Yeah.
Right.
They taught everybody.
This was I said. They were the first public school system.
They wasn't going to turn nobody.
Right. They were the first public school system.
What's that guy's name?
Ira Aldridge. Ira Aldridge. Check it out. You go find out what role Ira Aldridge played in the early.
Primary education, Christianity.
No. Well, you got to remember is that the primary means of reading was the Bible in the beginning, but once they got completely divorced from the slave, individuals went in every direction they possibly could, but as you do know, we became slaves to Christianity at the behest of the slave master.
He was living on the sweet side, this already.
Yes, correct, too. You just looking at him and saying that.
Hey, brother.
That's what I'm saying.
He had to be.
And the other thing, too, is that think of the time in which we're talking about. But let me go on. It says that the first black members of the Communist Party of the United States were Caribbean, and Caribbean conspicuously among its black members in the party was to continue up to the witch hunts of the 1950s. When leading Caribbeans such as Ferdinand Smith from Jamaica, Claudia Jones from Trinidad were deported, but again, there are no precise figures as to how many of the black members in Harlem, for instance, in the 1930s, were black membership of the Communist Party peaked and were Afro-Americans, and how many were of Caribbean origin. Now, the first two names they mentioned in the 1950s were Ferdinand Smith from Jamaica and Claudia Jones. Now, I'm not familiar with Ferdinand Smith, but Claudia Jones I'm familiar with because I have a personal relationship with Claudia Jones because of her son. Her son, Buzz Jones, was a good friend of mine. He's from England, and he was in the book business. Now, you know Fritz. Teddy, before he came to Brooklyn, he used to live in England. And while he was in England, Claudia Jones, who was a communist who was here in America, she left here and then she got deported back home. And while she was home, obviously they developed, stuff and everything there. But one of the things that I just shared with you, and that was that Malcolm Nurse or George Patmore wrote a book called Pan-Africanism or Communism. In the black socialist circles, it's like one of the most sought after books you could try to find. And right now it's very hard to get. And it was hard to get back in the late 80s, mid 90s. But what had happened was Buzz, Claudia Jones's son, was an editor. So we had one copy. So I told Buzz, I said, Buzz, look, why don't you get your mother to write the introduction to the frickin' book, and we just print this one. He was like, damn, that's what we should do. So what had happened was we had put everything together. We got ready to do the project, and Buzz got sick. And the project was on hold for about 10 years. And then what had happened was, in the 10 years, Miss Jones dies. So now we up Stuff Creek without a paddle, and we really got the manuscript, but we can't write the book because and I said, well, if your mother can't write it, why don't you write the introduction about your mother about the book? Now we could. But he delayed on it. We never ended up doing the project, and it got shelved for quite a number of years. I never heard back from Buzz because one of the things with how I met Buzz was, as Reg was telling you, there's a bookstore in Brooklyn called Head Start Books. It was on Rutland Road and Flatbush Avenue, 604 Flatbush Avenue, and he was the individual who we was introduced to the book business, I myself. And that's how I was introduced to all of these individuals. And believe me, some of the information, it was just mind-blowing. Like, I'm telling you about Claudia Jones. She was one of the earliest communists in America, but he also worked with Miguel Lauren. Miguel Lauren was a lawyer. He's actually right now the lawyer for the estate of Peter Tosh. But at that time, he was a lawyer, and he had a case that some Rastafarians went to the British Museum and they stole some Ethiopian documents from the museum. They stole all of these documents. So the British Museum, found out it was them and everything, so they arrested him and brought him up on charges and told them that, they was going to charge him. So when they went to court, what Miguel's defense was that it's impossible for y'all to accuse them of a crime. And the guy was like, why? He said, because you can't accuse me of stealing something that you stole. And then he went through an array of how they acquired the material. And the prosecution had no alternative but to admit that that's how they got it, because the evidence is in every history book. So he said that you can't accuse me of stealing something that was already stolen.
Or that is yours.
Well, listen to this. That's what he also said. He said, well, I was stealing back what was rightfully mine. So the judge, who was a British magistrate, he said, are you from Ethiopia? And he said, and then what he did, well, listen to this. He said, are you from Ethiopia? And he started speaking to the judge in Amharic. Right, but listen to this. So the judge said, I don't care if you speak to me in Spanish. If you don't have no documents that say that you're a national origin of the Ethiopian state, you don't have a claim. So what Miguel did was he said, well, okay, let's deal with that. So he put the case on hold, and he left England, came all the way here to the United States, and went to Trenton, New Jersey. Because at the time, Haile Selassie family was in exile in Trenton. This is when Mengistu takes over, the communists take over. So when he gets to America and he goes to the family and asks them, look, make homeboy an honorary member of the family or honorary African, and let's cut this shit loose. And they say no, because we got a good relationship with the government. That's right. That's exactly what he said. And they left homeboy out to dry. Now, mind you, he was convicted of, well, the problem was the original crime he wasn't convicted of because they proved that the government stole the shit first. But they tried to charge them with something, but one thing that was for sure, they only got a very small amount of the documents back. Let's say 20% of the documents. All of the rest of the documents they never got back. And then second is that the guy ended up doing, I think, like 6 months or some small number. He didn't do no year or nothing like that. He did a couple of months, and then they cut him loose. Now, the story is quite interesting, but it just shows you that black people in particular positions of authority and influence at that particular time was able to make headway. And some of these kind of thinking, because Claudia Jones and Ferdinand Smith or Richard B. Moore or like for instance, how about Richard Wright? Anybody ever seen the movie Richard Wright? Native Son, you never seen the movie?
No.
Well, go to YouTube or whatever, go look for the movie Native Son by Richard Wright. Richard Wright is actually in the movie. But how many did y'all know that Richard Wright was a communist?
Most of those cats were communists.
But the issue is most of individuals don't know. Some of them were more socialist than communist. The reason that was because, remember, communists is looked at as the extreme in retrospect. I mean, we talking about time period here because socialist is first and then communist. So most of all of the earlier individuals, they were all socialists. Like Hubert Harrison, they were socialists. But see, by the time all of them, that's why when, what's his name, Du Bois and all them get in, they don't go straight to socialism, they go to communism. Remember, W.E.B. Du Bois dies as a communist. And this is what I want y'all to do. This is homework. Listen, homework, everybody got homework. Homework is, I want you to go to YouTube and I want you to look for W.E.B. Du Bois and socialism. And it's a speech he gives on socialism and the black community. You need to hear it. You really, really need to hear it. because it gives you a perception on what he thought about socialism, but also what he thought about democracy and where he thought it was going. You know, his major claim was democracy and capitalism would never be fair. It just would never be. The richest men in the world say that. One day I was watching a program on, they used to have a program, a public affairs program that used to be headed up by this white boy, Charlie Rose. And Charlie Rose used to have these interviews with all of these famous people and all of this, right? And Charlie Rose did this interview with Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. At that time, they were the two richest men in the world. And the reason they were doing the interview was because Warren Buffett had gave Bill Gates' foundation $35 billion. He donated $35 billion to his foundation. And Charlie Rose wanted to know why. Like, you know, why $35 billion and why to this guy? So, the thing that got me was not the interview, but what he said first. The first thing he said out of his mouth, he said, well, the reason that I donated the $35 billion is because first, I can't spend it all. I can't spend it all. And second, I don't believe in, you know, financial inheritance. That means my kids ain't gonna get this money. Now think about this, and guess what he also said? He said, I don't believe in financial inheritance, or he does. And he pointed to Bill Gates, and Bill said, right, my kids ain't getting the money either.
Trust.
Listen to that.
Trust.
Listen to that.
That's a load of shit.
Yeah, but let me tell you what he said. Listen to what he said. He said, first of all, the reason they ain't getting the money because they ain't gonna need the money. He said, second of all, he said, and Bill will tell you this, he said, as long as they got our name, they good. He said they can go anywhere in the world with that name and they're going to get served.
Right.
Right. Now,
Bruh,
then he says,
Bill Gates' daughter, all that stuff, I saw the documentary, all that stuff is horseshit. Bill Gates' daughter just bought a $51 million mansion in New York City.
so how do you know it ain't her money?
What?
Like I said, how do you know it's not her money?
Bruh, I'm not even...
No, you just told me she wants something.
You went there. I all that shit. Y'all believe everything y'all see on TV.
Well, where'd you get it from, TV?
Bruh. None of all these people are
But he
lying.
ain't say they're gonna be in the poorhouse.
All these people are
He's got a
lying.
point.
The only
No.
person that's gonna give away her money to charity, and ain't gonna give away her money, is Oprah, because she ain't got nobody to give it to.
No, that's not true.
Who she got to give
Let me
it to?
tell you
Stephen?
this. Listen, I just watched a program on YouTube. The 5 richest women in America. The 5 richest women in America. And as you know, out of those 5, one of them y'all are familiar with. She's worth $53 billion. That's Bezos' ex-wife. And she said this. She said, my major claim, the guy asked the reporter, said, well, you know, she said, what do you intend to do? She said, I'm going to give every cent of it away. She said, I'm trying to make sure that before I die, the bank is empty, that the account will be closed. Now, up until that time, I think she's been divorced from him, 2 years now? Something like that. Whatever it is, she has already given away $7 billion. $7 billion. Now, and again, she's worth $53 billion. Now, but one of the things that's funny about every one of them, all 5 of them, the one that's the wealthiest is worth $64 billion. The only problem is every one of them, as I told Mike, how they acquired their money is by their father or their husband.
Yeah,
That means
works
that-
for the money, so they'll get out of the way in a second.
No. What I'm saying is that how they got the money, most of them they didn't have to go through that. There's a difference between you actually work for the money. You know, you actually was a partner. So it wasn't like, what's his name, Bezos said, well, you know, she was my wife, so she deserved, you know, she helped build the freaking company. From day one, she was there. No, I'm not talking about she was on the side doing secretarial work. She was on the floor doing the work. Right. So he knew that he had to take care of her, and that he had to take care of her immensely. Now, but when you think about it, it wasn't like he was broke after that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, come on, he. My major concern is that women with money is different than men with money. And women, how they, their philanthropy is 10 times different than men. Men's philanthropy is always attached to returns. That means they are not giving you money unless they're getting a return. That means, I'm not giving you charity unless I'm getting a return. That's right. With that, women, they don't do that too much. They just giving the money away. You know. But either way, I just wanted to share that with you.
Actually,
But
Chief, before you leave the topic of communism and socialism, I want you to make the distinction. The communism is versus socialism, and also where does the republic, this country, is supposed to stand?
well, again, this is why I say one of the things that we want to do is to find out, to have a working definition of these concepts. And the problem is that most of us don't have a clear definition. So again, in the study groups as well as in this process, I want y'all to get in the habit of comparative analysis of terminologies. So that way you really begin to understand how these terms are being used versus how and what their definitions are. Just because they are defined like this, that's not might be how the guy on the news is using the term. Or how the guy in the political community is using the term. So when we use the term democracy, when you look it up in the dictionary, and you find out its meaning, and then you look up and see how they're using it, you'll find out there's a problem. Because what it says and what they're saying is something different.
There's no clear definition for any of this.
None of it.
It's all nonsense. It's political.
But not only that, it's jargon. And if you listen to it, if you go read the definition of a republic or a Republican, the definition of democratic or democracy, you'll find out that the wording is a little different, but they say the same thing. They say the same thing. Only difference is on one side, the individual get access to more rights. So the underlying factor in democracy would be majority rule. That's the underlying factor because it's about voting. It's about, if it's 5 of us here and 3 of us say it's okay to lynch the other 2, democracy say that's all right. But see, in a republic, the republics say that the individual, as an individual, have a right for redress. That they can say, well, wait a minute, we can challenge that shit. And most of the time, as you know, that's not the way it always happens. So we deal with these things based on who's defining what the term is, or at what space in history or time are we defining that, and how many people agree with it.
And how it's applied.
That's the whole idea. So that's why I say, if I ask you right now, if I ask any of y'all, is communism a failure?
Is communism a failure?
Is communism a failure? Anybody?
I already know. I say no.
He say no. Anybody?
No.
She said no. No. Now, all of the people, whatever your answer was, why do you say no?
Because there's governments that are operating under the communist model and it's functioning in some degree.
Because it's just,
Wait a minute, hold on. I like that answer. That means you thought about what it was. You looked around the world. You've seen some countries that call themselves this, that, and the other. But yet, have you ever heard this? Communism failed. You ever heard that say? Ever heard them say that? When the wall came down in Germany, what did they say?
Yeah, the end of communism.
It'll be
Well, when Barack Obama became president, what did they call the day after? What did they call that?
The end of racism.
That's right. They call it
post-racial America.
Racial America.
Light skin power, baby.
Now, how many of y'all feel post-racial? Any of y'all feel post-racial?
I feel very post-racial. I don't see racism. I don't see color. I don't see anything.
I know you don't.
Right.
I do not, girl.
Now, the reason I asked y'all a question about the concepts is because what it validates is that we have a perception of something versus what the reality of it. So let's say this. Most of the people, let me say this, most of the people that are the richest people in the world keep their money in a socialist country.
Which country would that be?
French?
Switzerland?
Maybe.
Cuba, maybe?
No.
Cuba?
No,
You just
Korea.
pulling shit out?
Switzerland is the country. The reason that is because most individuals understand that you want to be able to make sure, and this isn't just about anything, that when doing business, that you're doing business with a company, a person, or an entity that is stable.
Switzerland's not a socialist country,
Bro, Switzerland is a socialist country, man.
All right.
I'm telling you. The term they use for it is democratic socialism.
It's just not a socialist.
It's capital.
Well, what's a socialist country then?
I don't want to take up everybody's time.
No,
It's a
no,
long
but
story.
you-
We do it
No,
at
go
the
ahead.
end.
No, do that.
We'll do it at the end.
It's a socialist country, I'm telling you. That's what they call it. Okay, well, let me read this last piece before we start winding down.
What was your definition again, Charles?
Of
Or
what?
answer to your question, yeah, I didn't hear it.
Definition of what?
Answer to your question about communism. I didn't hear what she said.
You said about what?
You asked everybody.
She answered your question about what did socialism
I didn't hear it.
Right. In other words, the nature of failure is based on the practitioner. It's not based on the concept.
Okay.
Because concepts are based on whose function. Now, everybody knows that you can have a flawed concept. That's reality. But the issue is that even if you have the greatest concept in the world, if it's not applied,
It don't mean nothing.
that's right, it ain't gonna be effective.
It's all about how it's used.
If you wasn't eating before and now they got a thing called socialism and you eating, it's a success for you.
That's exactly. And again, this is it. The issue is that when you talk about capitalism, and the issue is, if we think of what democracy is supposed to do, and we think of what capitalism does, that's not
Absolutely.
that's not parallel. It's not. They don't work hand in hand. Capitalism works against democracy.
Absolutely. Dictatorship.
It's the same as communism.
Say that again?
Capitalism is the same as communism.
See,
Capitalism. No, come on, man. That's not
No,
true.
it's totally different.
That's right.
All right, you guys can fantasize all you want with your intellectualism, but at the end of the day, capitalism and communism is the same goddamn thing.
It's not.
What does communism? What is the capitalism is economic?
Look at the definition.
Is it?
Bruh, look, no, forget it, just keep going.
Okay. Now,
Let me just say this, Trust.
go ahead.
If you were in a socialist country, let's say Cuba,
Mm-hmm.
and before when a family member of yours got sick and they didn't have any money, they died. But now they got a system in place where you can get free medical attention no matter who you are. that socialism is working.
Mm-hmm.
How about Canada? Or was it mixed?
Leave me out of this, just keep going,
I don't
Charles.
want to debate, but when I used to work in the Riverside side, there was a brother that used to say that black nationalism was going to turn to black capitalism. What do you think about that?
That black nationalism would turn to black capitalism?
Yes.
Oh, that's
That was back in the 70s. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's true, without a doubt. Because remember, here's a good example. Did y'all know that the Black Panther Party is not a black nationalist organization?
It's a socialist organization.
It's a socialist organization.
But listen,
What was the book that they used?
Power to the people.
The book that they used,
The Red Book.
the Red Book, Mao Zedong.
Yeah, and they read the.
And this is
No, wait a
what,
minute.
this is where your intellectualism is collapsing on your own
What he's
culture.
saying is that China
Y'all are batshit
Wait
crazy.
a minute. What he's saying though, in China, they practice a great deal of capitalism.
Yeah, but that's different in retrospect to, listen to this. There's an issue of what the concept is itself versus, like you said before, how do we apply it?
How would you apply?
Right. Versus, again, when you talk about different places in the world, like for instance, let's take a place like Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. Now, the way they operated and their particular, how can I say it? Their governing format. In retrospect, and if you looked at it and compared it, say, to, in this case, Switzerland, or into, what's the other place, Cuba, you'll find out that all of them have similar characteristics, but are very different. There are things that you do in Sweden that will never be done in Cuba. It'll never happen. Well, no, but I'm saying is that it's because of the amount of mixture that they have with these various forms of government, like you was talking about in China, and how, because it wasn't Jinping and these guys who came up with that. What's his name? The little short one is the one that Xiaoping. No.
That young, whatever.
Right, the little short guy before this one, the one that had the heart problems.
Right.
Right, he was the individual who started it all. Because what I mean in regard to the transformation of communism in the context of having open ideas with capitalism.
Right.
Prior to that, they wasn't having it. And the reason that is because the major form of communism in China was cultural. And remember, the fight over communism in regard to how it functioned was between Khrushchev and Mao. And the guy that was in between, the fall between that was the guy I was telling you about earlier, and that was Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh wanted support from the countries based on weaponry. He wanted weapons. But Mao and Khrushchev was fighting over what form of communism did Ho want. Did he want cultural communism from Mao, or did he want class communism from Khrushchev? You know what Mao said? He said, man, all I want is guns. I don't care nothing about all of that. Who gonna send me some guns? Right.
Can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
Okay, we got capitalism, which is basically like on the Adam Smith economics, and then we got communism, which is that Marxist worship. And we got black people who
No, see that?
Hold on a second, man. Let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
Don't chop me. So you got all this, one white boy and another white boy, right? And you got about 3 billion Negroes, and then you got another 1.5 billion Chinese. How is it that the only political theories that we have been discussing over the last 100 years are these white boys' theories?
We good. Yeah, we good.
I guess you're gonna make this short and sweet, right?
Let him answer the question.
What I was just, it's real easy. Because first of all, you got this idea that is their development. They developed communism or socialism. That shit was in the world way before they got there. They just decided to put a name on it.
That's horseshit.
Right. And then
Where was it developed? Where was communism?
Communism and socialism was developed all over the world. It just wasn't called that. It was called more of a concept called communalism.
I was getting ready to say it was African communalism.
That's right. And the issue is that it might have been tailored with a little bit different rhetoric in regard to how the white boys put rhetoric on it. But here was a guy, Marx, that was talking about the proletariat and about the working class, and they never had a job. He ain't never worked.
His mother told him, why you keep talking about money and you ain't got a job?
Well, the other thing too is that
communalism, African communalism and communism ain't the same thing.
we didn't say nobody here said it was the same. Nobody said it was the same
You
thing. I said it
communism
developed.
existed.
That's right. Listen, I said it developed out of that particular. I'm telling you, that's what it did. That it did. I'm telling you. Because it is not anything new. I'm telling you, it's not.
Communism and communalism are two diametrically opposed things,
No.
and communism did not come out of that.
No,
Well,
I'm telling you, that's where it came from.
It did not.
Can't two concepts coordinate and meet it and be
Now, you see, this is where we get into intellectualism. She is not Puerto Rican, okay? But conceptually, she can go to Puerto Rico, eat some bacalaitos, and become culturally Puerto Rican. What I'm telling you is African communalism and communism are diametrically opposed.
So we won't get far from the lecture.
See that's
It's
where we
just
get.
lecture, and what I'm saying is that
Ain't no European.
we know ourselves that is nowhere in the world among 1 billion Chinese people who were freeing themselves from the yoke of Europeans that they're going to apply the European concepts that are in Marxism. That's not how Mao did.
They did. He did.
Mao had to do it.
He did. He murdered 40 million people because of the Rothschild banking system. You know what you guys kill me? You study all these intellectual theories about money, and you never study money. If you study money and the people making money, you'll understand that you don't know what the hell you're talking about when it comes to capitalism, communism, or communalism, any goddamn political theory. Because the underlying facet of any political structure is the fucking money.
Get out of
And
here.
you guys ain't studying that.
Okay.
Again, like
You're
I
gonna do a couple
said,
of question and answer?
different times.
That's it.
For different times, different answers. But the very nature of organized communities wasn't based on money all the time.
And not
Don't
all
even try
controlled
that.
by the IMF.
We talking about now, brother.
What I'm saying, there's a difference.
You just crystallized my thoughts eloquently.
Listen to
When I said
what I said to you. What did I say? That what
Okay,
we
we
have
go
as
to some
communism
question and
or
answers real
socialism
quick.
developed out of something from yesterday. It didn't just out of a vacuum develop by itself.
What's the underlying principle of communism?
The underlying.
The first thing you got to do to turn a country communist.
What do you mean the first thing you have
What
to do?
you got to do to get a country to become communist?
Kill all the lawyers.
He's asking Trust a question.
What do you think?
I'm asking you, expert. I'm asking you.
To be a communist?
Yeah.
It depends on what kind of communist you
Here
want to
we
be.
go.
Okay, we gonna get.
There we go.
All
That's
right.
right. So, wait,
There we
look,
go.
you telling me that a communist, if you're a communist in Cuba and a communist in China and a communist in Russia, they all the same?
They got their theories from the same people.
No, that's not. See, that's again. That's like saying like a Baptist is a Catholic, or a Jehovah's Witness is a Mormon.
You still didn't answer my question.
I'm saying is that what I'm telling you is that it depends on the individual who's interpreting the concept and how they define the
You
concept.
can't answer my question.
What do you mean? I just answered your question. I told you that it depends on the individual.
Okay, let me
All
ask you.
right, okay, hold it.
Go ahead, let's go. My dear, go ahead.
Hold it. We're gonna take 3 questions, maybe 4, 2 from the floor and 2 from the Zoom. And Trust is gonna wind down 10 minutes. First question from the floor, go ahead.
All right, just to comment on what you were saying.
Question.
Question for him.
Question.
Well, should I make a comment? If it's a comment, go
Yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Okay, the first thing you want to do with communism is nationalize, right? I think that's what I'm thinking, is that's what you were looking for. You want to nationalize your resources.
No.
However, well, in
Hold up.
my understanding, the first thing you're going to do is nationalize your resources. And you have
True.
countries like Cuba who did it one way, expelling all of the foreigners and like physically just kicking them out and nationalizing. Now you have Singapore who got their independence and they did that strategically. They had ports owned by England and systematically took back their rights and had them train the natives. And that over 17 years, they had the same president. And people still don't know if Singapore is a capitalist or socialist country because they might vote democratically, but for 17 years they had the same people in power, and the same people from that original government are in power. So it's going to look different for every nation.
That's right.
It's always going to look
You
different.
been to Singapore?
I've studied.
You been to Singapore?
No, that's
Okay.
not.
Okay. Anybody from the Zoom have a question for Trust? Going once. Zoom audience, question for Trust. Going twice. Question.
Yes. The Negro world, was that not one of the ways to spread the UNIA, the Garveyism, and it would be read throughout the plantations and so forth, and, different spaces and places?
Yeah, it was the only way for a long time. That's correct.
Thank you, Baba. Thank you.
Anybody got a question from the floor?
I would say that that in dealing with a lot of organizations, as you pointed out, that had socialist leanings, whether it was the Black Panther Party, which was not nationalist, us was cultural nationalists.
That's right,
as
Coach.
opposed
And
to,
why do you think they became cultural nationalists?
well, I'm not sure, but I'll say that they wanted to return to the culture.
They did. What I'm saying is that they got the concept, the idea, the term cultural nationalism. They got that from from Mao and from the Black Panther Party. See, the issue about
Hold on.
we're talking about Malana Karenga, and we're talking about the Black Panther Party and the organization US, United Slaves, and we're talking about at this particular time, the issue in the black community was, again, whether we was going to look at ourselves as cultural nationalists or whether we was going to look at ourselves in the new dawned cloak that the African liberation movements were taking. And most of them were either communist or socialist. So this is where those individuals, but one of the things you found out early is that the Black Panther Party wasn't influenced by them. In other words, yes, they was influenced by the black liberation movements that were going on in Africa, but they didn't use that as their ploy for socialism. They used Mao. Now you would assume that, because here's a good example. When most people think that Stokely Carmichael was a Black Panther, he wasn't. But most people assume that Stokely Carmichael at that particular time was a nationalist. He wasn't. And that the Black Panther Party was primarily only for, their concepts were only for black people. They were not. And when what's his name, Bobby Seale was telling, he was interviewing with, what's his name, Felipe Luciano. He was on BAI.
Right.
He was telling them that at that time they were trying to deal in a universal approach versus a black approach.
Brown,
Right. And it's the same thing like we think about organizations today, like the NAACP. We call it a black organization. But go look at its history. It was a white organization, but it was founded as multiracial. It was founded as multiracial. Even today, the people will say that the highest award that you can get in the NAACP is in recognition of a white man.
Spingarn Award.
Right.
Right.
Now, but you had two Spingarns, Arthur and Joel.
They were brothers.
Right. The difference is that they were lawyers. And he came in the organization for one thing. He was going to defend individuals against civil rights cases. And listen to this, talking about money. When they started dealing with the issue of raising money in regard to the NAACP and who was going to be behind it, the president at that time was Garrison. Garrison said no, because he was the owner of a newspaper. And he said, no. He said, what we want everybody to know is that this is a social organization in regard to liberation of people, the untrodden people, so forth. If you want to deal with something economic in the black community, go to the Urban League. That's what he said. He said, because they dealt in economics, we deal in social issues pertaining to civil rights, so forth and so on. And that's why they brought Spingarn in, because at the time he was still in law school. And his brother was the individual at that time that was the go-between. But when he got in the organization, see, they also make this idea that Spingarn was one of the founders. He wasn't either. He came in when they needed him.
Well, and just the last point on that, for one thing, money, you can't look at money as the bottom line on it, because money without power leads to nothing. Because if you got money, you don't have an army, it's not protected, you don't own it, because they can take it from you. Look no further than what happened to Jews in Germany. They had a lot of money, and they got taken just like, overnight, just like that. But my other point is, again, just want to emphasize that a lot of people dug what us was doing. And they wondered, why was this friction between us and the Black Panther Party? But you have to understand culture. And this is what Milana to this day will tell you. If you don't have a strict remembrance on culture and emphasize that, then what you're doing will lead to nothingness, because you don't know who you are.
Well, the other thing too is that there were some internal social issues that caused the problem.
Oh, no question.
And what I mean by that is that I'm talking about some internal social issues in both organizations that caused violence.
Yes.
Right. And
people lost their lives.
Well, again, that's the issue.
Again, looking at Cuba maintaining itself.
Bravo.
Okay, hold up, Zoom. We're going to do a question from Zoom next.
Go ahead.
All right.
Cuba is maintaining itself in socialism, despite the IMF, despite the money, the sanctions that is opposed.
The embargo,
yeah,
sure.
Mm-hmm. So,
well, again, like I said, and as the young lady said, is that depending on where you're at in the world and how they apply it, because one of the things that is that, as far as I know, whether it's from Lenin to anybody, I've never seen no pure socialist anything, or no pure communist anything. What you've seen is a mixture based on whatever the current situations at the time warrant, and they felt that would work.
Dictates.
When you think about the concepts, here's a good example. The concepts didn't come from Marx, they came from Hegel. And the issue was, by time Marx got it, he had refined that shit in another way. And then by time Lenin got it, he refined that shit in another way. And by time Stalin got it, and when you notice that every time it went up another step, it got more violent, it got more crazy, it got real extreme. And when you look at real, and I'm just talking about the base of the concept, not how the jokers are applying it. When you think of communism, socialism, or anything, you're thinking about sharing, resources in a way where it's applicable for everybody.
That's not true.
Listen what I'm saying. When I say applicable for everybody, I'm not talking about everybody get 5 apples. That's not what I'm talking about. Right. I'm talking about being able to function efficiently where that the very nature of the wealth is shared, and the issue is nobody's going hungry, nobody is going health served, or you serve it, that you're getting what is needed. You know what I mean? And if to me, one of the best forms, an example of social sharing that I have ever seen, and this is just one scene in a movie, and it was about the concept of what was taking place that was never said to be socialism, communism. Anybody ever seen this movie called Colombo?
Yeah, Colombo.
Right, and it's about a Brazilian garrison that escaped to the mountains called Palmeiras, and that they fought as a resistance group against the incoming colonizers. And what had happened was, while they were up into this garrison area, they created this whole community. This, what do they call it? This, they call them Maroons, this Maroon community. And what had happened was, they had this setup where that, all of the work that's done in the community, in the society, is done for the whole. And whatever you produce, whatever you make, whatever, it goes into storage. And whenever a person needs it, you go there and you get it. So if you need corn, you go, you get corn. If you need blankets, you go and get blankets. Whoever, so forth and so on. But one time, they were going to the storehouse to get some corn. And it was a lady and a man. And it was like them little bushels that you have pulling on both sides. Well, they had both sides, and it was maybe about 5 or 10 pieces of corn in the bushel there. So the lady was grabbing one side, and the man was grabbing. And they were saying, "Oh, it's my corn." The lady was saying, "I had it first," and the man was saying, "Well, it's my corn, this, that, and right." And they was tugging back and forth. So the guy said, "Well, okay, we're gonna take it to the king and let the king settle this." So they go to the king, and he says to the king, he says, "King, these 2 individuals have been fighting over the corn." So the king says, "Okay, what do you have to say?" So the man jumps up and said, "She started taking my corn. I had the corn first. I was the one. I set the bag there, this, that, and the other." So the lady said, "But nobody, how can you, the corn was there. Just like it's there every day. And when I come, I take corn and I leave. Nobody ever asked me nothing like that." So the man said, "But it's my corn. I put it there." So the king says, "Wait a minute." He said, first of all, he looked in the basket. He said, how much corn it is. So he looked at the corn, and then he said this. He said, first of all, this is Palmeiras. This is everybody. So he said, "Can you have my cloud or my sun? Can it be my rain? Can it be my river?" He said, "So how can you have my corn?" He said, "The river, the corn, the sun is for everybody. We all benefit. And when you make it personal," you get what I'm saying?
That's a socialist concept.
So the issue is, we're just talking about a concept here. We're not talking about, a means of governance in regard to a modern day, structure. What happens is, a great deal of time is that we get caught up in the jargon. We just get caught up versus what is actually taking place on the ground, in the communities. And there are communities on this earth right now that don't have no contact with social societies, communistic societies, democratic societies, and they function well.
Okay.
They have Marlon Brando, Colombo.
Anybody got a quick question from the Zoom? A question?
You ain't gotta yell.
Okay, that's it. Trust, you got 10 minutes to wind it down.
Okay.
And finish it off.
Okay, as I wind down, I just want to say this. I want to, before I leave, go ahead.
Trust had asked a question.
No, what's your question?
Jesus Christ.
What's your question? Question,
He asked
question.
the question. Trust had asked the question.
Trying to keep
And
it tight.
the answer was on the organization's political and economic is the answer I was going to give.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
She said, you said it's,
Speaking on the question he had asked the audience and Michael, that was the answer. That's my answer.
okay.
Okay.
And then the success of UNIA and so forth, economic and political. Culture.
Right, well, again, that's, see, my thing is that what happens as time goes on, which didn't happen back in the day, and that is that when I mean really early in human organization development, and that is the separation of economic development versus the social and cultural aspects or the political aspects of the society. The politics and the money is able to show you that link up, but everything else they feel are nothing but the fallout of what those two actually develop. Where that in real social society, those developed first, and then the money and the other stuff came later. Because remember, you know, in social organizations, the issue was about survival. That's what it was about. And the issue was about in the earliest days, not only survival of what you was going to eat, but the protection of your livelihood. Because now you're out in an environment that you're not used to, that you wasn't familiar with, and you have to maintain yourself, and you under attack.
All right. Wind it down, Trust, 3 minutes, and that's it.
All right. I want to first, before I leave, I want to just share in totality some of the material that you can resource to in regard to expanding on the subject matter about this in regard to socialism, much less communism, in the black community. These are a few sources that you can go to. Believe me, it's quite an array of material that you can get with this, but I have a few source material that you can draw off of today that give you a starting point, and then I'm pretty sure that the sky will be the limit in regard to this particular subject matter. The first book that I want to share with you is by Harry Hayward. This is Harry Hayward. The name of the book is Black Bolsheviks. It's an autobiography of an Afro-American communist. He wrote a few different books. Harry Hayward was actually a good friend of my uncle, who also was a communist. My uncle was the piano player for Paul Robeson in the 40s and going into the 50s. He also was in the military. He actually fought in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade for the Spanish Civil War in 1939. And he was one of the first members of the Communist Party in Harlem, and also the Socialist Color League, the Socialist Color Club that Hubert Harrison had set up quite a few years earlier, that he eventually got out, and they ended up running the organization. But Harry Hayward is a go-to person for that particular, and I've called the earliest communist in America. That's Harry Hayward. Another book you want to get is No Crystal Stare. I showed this to you before. It's by Theodore Cohen-Weeble. It's called No Crystal Stare, Black Life and the Messenger, 1917 to 1928. The Messenger that they're talking about was a news paper or news organ that was put out by A. Philip Randolph and Chandler Owen, and it goes into a lot of their activities during the early Renaissance period. You also have Blood Relationship. I told you about this one before too. Irma Watkins Owens, powerful young lady. This book subtitles as Caribbean Immigrants and the Harlem Community from 1900 to 1930. This book is originally published, by Indiana University Press. And it not only talks about those subject matters, but it also talks about the transformation of the black community, again, not just in Harlem, but in concentrated African areas in the United States. This probably is one of the most powerful books, probably hard to get, but Winston James did an excellent job. You can get material in here that I would say that you can't get in a lot of other books. The name of the book is Holding Aloft the Banner of Ethiopia by Winston James. The subtitle is The Caribbean Radicalism in Early 20th Century America. The earliest 20th century America. This is published by the Verso Press, 1998. Again, Holding Aloft the Banner of Ethiopia. One of my go-to, this is the first volume. It's a 2-volume set. The first volume is 600 pages. I would believe that the next volume is bigger than this. But it's a 2-volume put out by, again, a good friend of mine, Jeff Perry, Hubert Harrison, a biography. They call him the father of Harlem radicalism. He was the man during the Harlem Renaissance period. And if you don't do nothing, if you go Google, just Google some material about Hubert Harrison, and you'll find out the role that he played, not just as an intellectual organizer, mover, shaker of the day. One of the things that he was known for was the dissemination and circulation of books. So whether you know it or not, he's the individual that helped Alonzo Schomburg set up the Schomburg Library for research. So Hubert Harrison, 2-volume set. And then I already shared these two with you by Theodore Vinson, Black Power in the Garvey Movement, and then Voices of the Black Nation, black newspapers, and the dialogue between black communities and black groups. And then, what the Black Garvey movement really meant, to us at a particular time. And again, given to us in a more unadulterated way. So that's Theodore Vincent and the 2 books, Black Power in the Garvey Movement and Voices of the Black Nation. And last but not least, this is a book I picked up not too long ago. Probably a couple of weeks ago. It's called The Negro and the Communist Party by Wilson Record. It's originally published by Greenwood Press. If y'all don't do nothing, get familiar with book publishing companies. Greenwood Press is one of the best in regard to black, really good, top-notch material in black culture. They have a lot of material. But their books are a little pricey, but they're worth every penny of it. This book here is hard to get. I looked at the internet, it's about $90 now. But I picked it up from Strand 2 weeks ago for $8.95 at Strand. So, yeah, they're still around.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, give Trust a big hand.
Yeah.
Zoom audience, we gotta cut it short. We gotta get into the Harlem Tubby by 11. Thank you very much.
This book is out as Paul Coates
Mike,
and
who
doing
wants
now.
take-
Got a new cover for it.
Come on, family.